Hey everybody, welcome to the NAMM Believe in Music Week. This is the Undertone audio demonstration area, whatever it is. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but I'm here demonstrating stuff. So thanks for coming and checking this out. This is an announcement of a new Undertone audio product. I'm super excited about this one. And so happy to be able to announce this at the NAMM show. I was hoping to have a prototype of the actual physical box to demonstrate, but it got pandemicked. Couldn't get it done in time. Man, everything is just moving real slow. It's tough getting stuff done when nobody can be in the same room. So we could not pull that off as hard as we tried, but we will still be able to do, I think, a very interesting and informative discussion and demonstration of this thing using the design files and an audio example where this exact approach is being used. I'll explain all of that as we get into it. So here we go. This is what I am calling the GB tracker, Undertone Audio GB tracker. GB stands for guitar and bass. That's primarily what I use it for. There's some keyboards out there that you can plug into an amp where it might be useful for that, for sure. But for me, primarily guitar and bass. It works amazing for those instruments. I'll have examples of that later on. And so really this is a complete system. I finally had an opportunity to distill down into one box the system that I've been using for recording guitar and bass for years now. It's a combination of a custom-made DI that is part of the Undertone arsenal. It's actually the DI part that's built into the mic preamps that are in the MPDI4 and the MPEQ1. It's an amazing sounding FET-based DI with a custom reamp type box that we built ourselves, a very, very simplified version of that Larry came up with the design for. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler. All you need is a really, really great sounding transformer, one resistor, and a trim pot, and you're good to go. And so it just has been working amazing, and I really wanted to get it into a form factor that was really set up specifically for this workflow, this tracking workflow, and so this box finally does that. So let's take a look at what this front panel looks like. So here it is. This is the GB tracker. Here is the front panel. This is the rear panel with the additional connections on the back. And so I'm just going to talk through what all this stuff does really quick. It's very straightforward. So there's an input jack. That's where you'd plug your guitar in. This is input gain, and they are stepped. So it's a very specific increment, 4 dB for every step. You get a total of 20 dB. So there's 5 steps, 4 dB each, 20 dB of gain that you can add to the input gain. And then the output, you can see, matches it exactly with an amount of padding. And this is one of the things that, with the setup that I've been using, even though I like the approach, has been kind of cumbersome, is that I want to be able to have it so I can plug a guitar straight into an amp while I'm auditioning amps and guitars and figuring out, what combination of a guitar and amp I want to use. I find the combination I like, then I can incorporate this GB tracker system and have the gain be absolutely exactly the same. And so that's what these stepped gain settings allow you to do. So you can set a gain that's going to be appropriate for the input, so the signal that's being sent to your recording device, whether it's a computer or whatever, is set appropriately, and then you match the padding on the output, so when your guitar goes through this thing, when it lands at the amp, it is the exact same volume as if you just plugged your guitar directly in. It's really important about this. And this thing is really designed to be as transparent as possible. It's not like a lot of other gear where at this point we're all trying to find all kinds of beautiful coloration to introduce into our input chains, to capture stuff into the computer. The computers, digital recordings don't add the same kind of color as some of us are used to using tape machines and old tube gear and whatever we might have been using. And so we're looking for a lot of color and things. This thing, we are not trying to do that. I want it to be as invisible as possible. I want it to sound as close as humanly possible to plugging the guitar directly into the amp. And I think we did an amazing job of that. The input stage is a JFET input amp. It's really good at emulating the same kind of input impedance that you'll find on a vintage tube amp. Very, very high input impedance. And so that can really affect the signal that's coming out of the guitar. There's a lot of devices you plug into them and they have a much lower input impedance, and it really messes with the sound of the guitar. And so we wanted to have this thing sound invisible. It's like a 4.7 megohm input impedance. For anybody that cares and wants to know those kind of numbers, that's what it is. And so it's really invisible sounding as in how it loads or affects the sound of the guitar. And then the circuitry itself is all Class A. Totally invisible sounding. The only thing that will add a little bit of color is when you get to the reamp side. There is a transformer in there, but we specifically chose an amazing performing Cinemag transformer that is super invisible sounding. So it's as clean as you can possibly get with all of this stuff. So that's what the goal is. And if you want to have that exact unity gain, all you have to do is keep these numbers matched up. So if you need more gain going in, you're playing kind of a quieter part, or you're using an instrument that doesn't have a whole lot of output, and you set the gain maybe up around 24. If you want it to hit the amp at the same volume as when you plug directly in, you just set the output to minus 24, and the level will be exactly unity gain. Here's the cool thing. Being able to have these controls independent means that you can actually add gain if you want to, or even take gain away if you need to. But it's more common. People will use little line booster pedals and stuff like that to add gain to their guitar going to an amp. If you have there's some really cool vintage sounding amps, but they don't have an additional preamp stage to them. So you could potentially add 20 dB of gain. So if you leave this at minus 12 and set this at plus 32, you're going to have an extra 20 dB of gain, really clean gain, going into that whatever amp you might be using. It can be really useful at times. So if you want to use it to manipulate the gain structure, you can do that, or you can rely on it to be super accurate in maintaining unity gain. Sound exactly the same as just plugging your guitar straight into the amp. So we have a few switches here. So the way this is set up is you would plug your guitar into the input, set your gain, set your input gain, set your output gain the way you want it. Output, this is just a 1/4" jack, goes to your guitar amp. And while you're tracking live, you put this toggle switch in the live position. So the incoming signal is just sent directly to the output and goes to the amp. And at the same time, there's a balanced XLR jack on the back of the device that allows you to send a line level signal to your recording device. In my case, it's always would be the computer. The computer, is really good at capturing a DI signal without adding any noise and not adding any color. I love using tape machines, but if you're trying to capture a DI to be reamped later, tape machines are not good for that. So let's just assume for all of this that we're talking about capturing the stuff into a computer. So this goes to your computer, and then you can send that DI track out of your computer and go back in here. This is the female XLR jack, and have that line level signal come back in here. As long as your audio interfaces are calibrated correctly, so they are unity gain as well, so whatever level comes in is going to be the same thing coming out. It will be the identical level. And so let's say you capture a bunch of performances and you want to make an adjustment to the amp after you've comped together some performances or whatever. Comping with the DI track is way easier. If you have a distorted sound, you know, all of the waveform dynamics disappear when you're recording distorted guitars, and it gets a lot harder to do edits, you know, really specific edits. So I like to comp with the DI, and then what you do is you just take this switch it to the recorded version, and then that signal that was captured in your computer now gets fed to this output attenuation setting and the output jack and onto the amp. It just replaces the live signal with the recorded DI signal. You have additional settings here, very simple. This is just a phase setting. There's sometimes I like to layer multiple amps, and the phasing between the amps can be really fun to play with, so you can, you know, toggle that up or down. And then there's really important ground isolation. So this output transformer, which is a part of this output that goes to the amp, you can isolate the grounding. The transformer itself is shielded, and obviously the transformer will eliminate the direct connection between this input signal and the output signal. So you can isolate the grounding going to the amp. That's really important ultimately when you start getting into layering multiple amps or just isolating the grounding from your recording device or whatever. It just makes it so you get a nice, quiet, no possibility of ground loops going to the amp. Sometimes I will use this type of setup just to get rid of grounding problems. So it can be really useful for that. So I almost always leave this off. You know, occasionally it makes sense to ground it, but with a really good shielded, you know, output transformer, it's almost inevitably better to just leave the grounding off and isolate the grounding going to the amp. So then you have it. There you go. So you've recorded your performance with the DI. You can now, you know, send it back to the amplifiers. You could add more amps. You could try different microphones. You can move your mics around. You can do all kinds of stuff at that point with the captured performance. And the thing that I love about this is it allows me to be more in the moment when the band is in the room and excited to play, and I don't have to labor endlessly making sure that I have the absolute perfect guitar sound. What I need at that point is a guitar sound that feels good and is inspiring to play with for the musician. And so once I have that, I'm ready to go. Let's not stand around here anymore while I'm screwing around with microphones and trying different amp settings or different pedals or whatever. As long as we have something the musician is really excited to play with, let's go. And so then after the fact, I can do all of my super tweaky, you know, spend the rest of the night trying every amp and microphone in the building, part of the process, while everybody else is, you know, out having a good time at the bar or watching Netflix or something. So I don't have to abuse everybody with that part of the whole experience. So it's really cool for that. For, you know, all of this stuff is really ultimately about capturing and being able to preserve and use the best performances. You know, it's flexibility that allows you to keep the best performances. It's the thing that I love the most about this workflow. So then, if you want to layer amps, there is this satellite output. And so there's an additional box called a satellite. And so here is the front panel and rear panel for the satellite box. And it looks, you know, it's just a little box about the same size as, you know, any reamp or DI you might find. And it has the exact same transformer that's in the GB Tracker box and the same attenuator settings. So you can match up this same setting with the GB Tracker output, and you will have an additional output that has the exact same gain structure, or you can alter it to accommodate a different amp if you want to. This also can isolate the ground, because once you start layering amps, you really have to isolate the ground between the amps. It's a gigantic grounding mess if you don't do that. And also be able to adjust the phase. So what ends up happening is you can use this satellite output to go to this XLR input jack right here where it says from tracker, or satellite in small letters there, you can see that. And so take this signal in here, and now you can plug into an additional amp. And you can just keep going with it. The output impedance of this signal that's coming from this input stage is low enough, and there's enough current drive there, is a robust enough signal that you can drive a bunch of these satellites if you want to. There is a point where if you layer up 10 of them or something, that it'll start to load down the output a little bit, and this really exacting matching between the input and output gains might drift a little bit. You'll start to find that the signal coming out is going to be just down a little bit. So it's just something to be aware of if you want to layer tons and tons of amps, that first amp that you're using, that you got everything exactly set perfect for, the level may have dropped just a tiny bit. It's just a reality of how loading and impedance and the physics of all this stuff works. So so there's that. But if you want, bam, you could have an amp coming out of here. You can have 4 more amps layered here, all with the grounding isolated, all with their own individual recallable output pad settings. You can either match it so the gain is identical to this first setting, or you can do different gain settings on all of these, and different phase settings for all the amps in case some amps, you know, they are phased differently. So incredibly powerful tool for blending amps for sure. Definitely the way I've always done it is with a DI and reamps. It's been the best way to do it for sure. So how do you hook all this up? I've talked through it. It might be easier to actually see how all this goes together. So here's a little signal flow chart. Dun, 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 I put together. So you got your guitar right here. Guitar goes into the input of the GB tracker. You set your level right here. And so this level, really what you're setting with this is the level that is going to be best for what you're capturing in the computer. And so if you're playing with an active instrument, a guitar that has an active pickup, and you're playing super hard, just bashing away at it, you're probably going to want to keep it really low so it's not clipping the input of your computer. If you're playing a vintage instrument that has passive pickups and there's a lot less output from the instrument and you're playing like a really soft finger picking part, you may want to set this level much higher so you're capturing a healthy level into the computer. And then ultimately you can match that level with the output gain and have it still be unity gain going to the amp, so it will sound the same as when you just plug directly into the amp. So once you get all those levels set, you're set to live right here. So what you're performing live in the moment is what's being sent to the amp. Then this output labeled 2 amp predictably is going to go to the amp. Here it is going to whatever amp you want to use. And then you'd have a microphone on your amp right here. There's a mic going to it. Have a little mic preamp. There's the little MPDI4. So the mic goes into a microphone channel, and the output of the mic preamp will also go into your computer. And so for each of these tracks, you're capturing 2 signals. You're capturing the raw DI signal, and you're capturing the mic'd amp signal at the same time. There's other ways that you can do it. A lot of times when I'm working on demos of songs, I won't have an amp going at all, and I'll just use an amp simulator. Something that just, you know, is close enough for me to get the idea. I'm just putting down ideas, trying to write a song, whatever. I can capture it that way. And not even worry about this amp part of it until way later. And we'll see how that works out with the audio example. So, and then the 2 recorders, so this balanced XLR output will go to a line input on your DAW audio interface, so you can capture the DI. And then you'd have an output from your DAW, a line level output, that comes back and goes to the from recorder input here. And so that allows you, as you're going along and working on stuff, you can be playing live and hearing your signal go directly to the amp with no latency. That's also important, because the signal goes directly to the output at the speed of light. And then at a certain point, if you want to have the capture DI performance go back through that same rig, all you have to do is just flip this switch to recorded, and it will send that signal now to your amp. So let's say you want to have another amp. This is how that goes. So if we want to add another amp, we would take the two satellite signal, connect an XLR cable from here, go to the from tracker input on the back of the satellite box, and then from the amp output, we can adjust gain, choose, isolate the grounding or not, choose phasing, and then have the 2 amp signal go to an additional amp. There's another microphone here, goes to the mic preamp, and then that also goes into the computer. So you can keep adding more amps if you can just keep doing it. So then let's have a 3rd amp. You have another satellite box, the output goes to the amp, and you daisy chain these satellite boxes. So you can pull the signal from this satellite and send it to another satellite, and then take the output here and have it go to an amp. Mic it up, go to the mic preamp, boom, over to the computer. Now you're capturing 3 amps, and all being driven either by the guitar live in the moment or by the captured DI that's in the DAW. So what about pedals? Well, there's a couple ways to approach that. My favorite way to do this is to always have the guitar go directly into the GB tracker, because it offers the most flexibility. I'm not committing to anything on the way in. The signal that I'm capturing is identical to what comes directly out of the guitar. So if I want to change pedal settings or change pedals or change amps or whatever, I can definitely do that. So then you can have the output of the GB tracker go to a pedal board or pedal or whatever, and then onto the amp. And when you switch to the recorded signal with this switch, that signal will go through those same pedals. You can adjust the settings if you want. Here's the catch with this approach, is that if you're doing multiple amps, these pedals would only go to this amp. There is a benefit sometimes, and this has actually happened a lot for me, is if I'm using multiple amps, I don't necessarily want the same pedal settings for every single amp. Some amps might want a little more gain going to them with a pedal, or some sort of overdrive pedal, or a specific delay or reverb or something like that, and I don't want that on all of the amps. Then I can do different pedal settings for all of the amps. So I would just put pedals in this path right here, or a different pedal in this path right here. But there may be times where you actually want to make sure that you have the identical pedal, everything. If you're really confident about, I know I want to use this reverb on everything, I know I want to use this delay or whatever it is on everything, then you simply put your pedal board before the GB tracker. And so then all of that information, the guitar and the pedals and everything, gets captured in the DI, it's sent to this amp. That same identical signal would get passed to the satellite output and go to this amp and onto this satellite and onto this amp. So all 3 amps would have the identical pedals. So those are some cool ways to set it up, and you can do combinations of things. If there's a reverb that you want to have go to everything, but there's an EQ pedal that you only want on 1 amp, you put the EQ pedal after the GB tracker, you put the reverb pedal before the GB tracker. That's how it works. So let's see how this all actually works out. I have a session here. So this is a song that was recorded for my wife's album. Grace Potter made a record, put it out near the end of 2019 called Daylight. This is the title track. It's nominated for a Grammy, so it's a good example. It seemed like it worked pretty good on this. All of these stringed instruments, all of them, the bass and all of the guitars, were recorded with this workflow, where every single one went through an undertone JFET bass DI and went through one of our undertone custom reamp type boxes. So I'm going to put some headphones on so I can actually hear what we're listening to here. So here is the end result of what it was, and I'll play the section that really sort of features the guitar. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff that happened in this. So this song was originally demoed at our home studio, and I recorded all the guitars like I described with an undertone audio DI, the same DI circuit that's in the GB tracker. And and made this demo of the song using just amp simulators. In this case, it was the amp simulator called 11. I think it's part of the Avid collection of plugins. And so that sounded like this. So then we did the final recording of this song with a band live in a room, everybody playing and Grace singing all at the same time in a room. And so all of these parts were replayed. But in either case, it made sense for me to use this workflow. It makes sense for me to use this workflow when I'm doing the demo, because if there's a chance that I want to use one of these performances, and that ended up happening on this song, I have the option of doing that in a really cool way. So when the band played, and you can see, so there's Benny Yurko that's playing half of the guitar parts, and a guy named Tom Ayers who's playing the other half of the guitar parts. So these are their guitar performances here. This is Benny's DI, this is Tom's DI. This is the amp signal that was captured live with the band. This is Tom's amp signal that was captured live with the band. And then these two tracks here are the reamp version of Benny's guitar. And these two tracks here are the reamp version of Tom's guitar. And then down here, I have the reamp version of my demo guitar, all of which ended up getting used. They started in totally different contexts, but they ended up getting used. And so in this live session, exactly what I described is what happened. You have a room full of people. There's 5 people in the room that are dying to just start playing. And so I got an amp set up for both Benny and Tom that felt great. They were ready to play. I knew we were using the right guitar to capture for these parts. And we got something that felt great for them to play. And it was like, okay, here we go. We're ready to make some rock music. So I'm not having everybody waiting around forever while I'm screwing around with guitar sounds. And so that signal, that original live signal for Benny's guitar, sounded like this. And you can hear the DI that was being captured at the same time. And so it also offers a cool opportunity for me able to do some processing. On all these guitars, I ended up doing a huge mid-range push. So this is like 1.4K, almost plus 8 dB on there. And then here is a cool spring reverb. There may have been a little bit on the amp that he was using at the time, but the amp that I used to reamp with did not have a reverb in it. And so I was able to add reverb with this. I love this particular plugin. It sounds amazing. It's a really incredible impulse response of a great sounding spring reverb. And so this DI signal ended up getting sent to an AC30, a Vox AC30. If you know that amp, you know it doesn't have a spring in it. And so here is the reamped signal. And so I'm able to take my time when I was doing this, and this got reamped back at my home studio. I had a bunch of amps available to me, and so I could take my time getting everything exactly the way I wanted. The perfect compression setting, I do EQing, it went through an old Studer J37 tape machine, things that I cannot do in the moment when everybody is anxious to play and waiting to get started, especially the tape machine part. And so I got to capture this really, really cool version of this sound in that moment. The same thing happened with Tom's guitar. So here is, there's Tom's DI. Here's what his live guitar amp sound like. And then here is what the reamped guitar sounds like. And it's cool. I got to like take the time to get a bunch of cool, like wiry, high-end energy in that guitar sound that I just couldn't chase down at the time. And also able to capture a room sound. So if you see here, this is the tom guitar room sound. 7.5 IPS that's the speed that I was using for the tape machine that it was being captured through. And so when there's a bunch of people playing in a room together, I have limited options for how much I can use room sounds. And I've been really enjoying having mics further away. So I can re-amp stuff and have the mics, 5, 6, 7 feet away and still have good isolation for the sound coming from the DI as a re-amp. And so I get this cool room sound. And this is, it's a small room, so it's tight and punchy, but you could hear space around the sound instead of like this live captured guitar sound where I really have to have the amp pretty much, or the mic just pretty much right up on the amp. Less of a sense of space around the amp. So then for the riff section, for whatever reason, the demo guitars just felt cool in that part. So I wanted to use those. The original demo guitars were recorded with this little bit of EQ on there. It was a Gibson 335 going straight to the DI. It had this EQ on it, a little bit of this same reverb on there, and this amp simulator. And so this is what it sounded like on the demo. And when I reamped it, ultimately, here, it sounded like this. So same kind of thing. You just get that opportunity to hear more of a space around the instrument instead of this really, really like in a vacuum. These amp simulators tend to not have much air on them because it's just it's not a real sound being, put out into a space that you can hear, that you can identify with your ear. And so there's two totally different circumstances, but in both cases, whether I was demoing it and I had a performance that I felt great for the part that I wanted to keep, this workflow made it possible for me to keep that performance. And also the band playing live, if I had not captured those performances this way, I would have had to commit to the guitar sounds that were captured live with the band. I would have had no option other than just EQing and playing with them with stuff after the fact, the recorded version of the amp, to try and get it where I want. I have a whole world of stuff that I can try after the fact because I have that amazing, pristine DI signal. I can run it back out to the amps, try different amps, different miking, room sounds, different pedals, anything I want, and get it to sound amazing. And there's even places in here where I'm automating the effects on the DI, things that I cannot really do live, and custom tailor the gain and the amount of reverb, turn delays on and off, all those kind of things, and custom tailor it for the performance throughout the song to really have the settings of the amp and effects match the performance and really optimize that captured performance, which I loved because they played amazing with the band. So there you go. That's the concept. This is the device that does it and makes it totally effortless to do, to match up signals, to add gain, to switch between live and playback, to do all of those things. It's all built into the system. It makes this particular workflow, I think, undeniably the way to do it. And you end up with something like this and possibly a Grammy nomination.